Okay, so we've attempted things like no shooting, no jumping, no driving vehicles, but what if we had to beat Halo without looking? Specifically, without using the stick that allows us to look around or to aim. Don't worry, we do have that idea of doing a full blindfolded run one day in the future, but first, could we even get through a Halo campaign without using the right stick altogether? What if Master Chief was just kind of glued in his armor to his hips? I don't really know how that would work. Nonetheless, we wanted to see if we could beat Halo 3 without turning at all, without aiming, without looking around, and this ended up being way more challenging than we had initially suspected, but maybe this is something that is possible. So we decided to jump in, starting off on Sierra 117 with me, Rocket Elijah, alongside Rocket Luke and Rocket Dim Entree, and figure out just how far we could get without managing to turn around or to even look around to see where we are in the beginning. Now, right off the get-go, I was the only one who spawned in facing the right way, and you're watching Luke's perspective right now. He was facing the wrong way alongside Dim, and early on, Luke got stuck on a tree, but this first section was really curvy, and for the most part, since we're kind of just walking alongside cliff walls or other types of barriers that keep us on the main pathway, it quickly turned into something where we're mostly trying to play through the level off of memory with the few visual cues and the audio cues that we do have to try to navigate. Now, despite this first section with Luke and Dim getting pretty lost, since I started off facing the right way, I kind of had a little bit of a better sense of where I was going, and it wasn't long before I teleported Dim and Luke over to me, which was more confusing for them because of the accidents and backtracking and facing the wrong way that seemed to occur right after. However, earlier on in the run, we did start to realize something that we might need to use on some of the harder levels later on, which essentially is when we face enemies when we're looking at them, the game tries to do this auto-aim drag with the reticle, and we were able to an extent, have our characters rotate and move a little bit by staring at the enemies or sidestepping alongside enemies or even punching enemies just so it can move the camera a little bit. Now, at times, this can completely mess you up and ruin any progress you're making, but maybe this is something that can come in handy later on. And when we got to the part with the elevated ground that you're supposed to walk across, it was kind of a pain because falling off meant we had to wrap all the way around, and at times we're just blindly walking backwards trying to figure out what we're supposed to do, which was somewhat ridiculous and surprisingly difficult to figure out, though we did start to make a little bit of progress as we reached the outer section before we would go and save Johnson. So when we got to this last section, it was a little bit more of an open area. We just had a cutscene. We're kind of facing the right way, so we were feeling good about this section. Navigating alongside the bridge with all the enemies everywhere was a little more challenging. Dim did get lucky and grabbed a gravity hammer, making it a bit easier for him, but when we finally got Johnson out and sidestepped our way back to the bridge and then backpedaled and tried to fight enemies without dying simultaneously, we were able to clear at least one level of Halo 3 without turning. But going forward with things like Crow's Nest, which are all tight hallways, to other levels where vehicles are heavy or scarabs show up, or even things like Warthog runs down the road, how far can we actually get without turning? Well, Crow's Nest was next, and this level mostly had tight hallways, making it seem like we were just constantly hitting walls along the way, and trying to aim in any extent when we were in the hangar was a pain just because there's multiple levels where the enemies sometimes drop down or they're jumping out of a phantom or something like that, but we did the best we could. When we got to the buggers at the door, it was a little bit frustrating because we're still aiming at whatever direction we were from when we were back in the hangar, making it a little bit harder to see where the buggers were. There was a point where Luke decided he was going to speed run this and try to do a hammer launch across this large gap. It didn't end up too well for him. But then as we progressed through and we made our way through the bunker, going to the section where we fight against the jetpack brutes, we ran into an issue where we killed all the brutes, but the level wouldn't progress. Seriously, we were really confused because there was nothing showing up on our radar. We were walking around, all the enemies seemed to be gone, but nothing was happening in the level. Matter of fact, we were pretty confident we had softlocked somewhere along the way, but we couldn't figure out what was going on. And since we can't turn around or look around to see what we're possibly missing or what could have caused the softlock to happen, we were kind of stuck here. We ran around for a bit thinking our run might be dead, but then finally decided we'll just revert to last checkpoint and try it again and figure out what happened again. So we killed all the brutes on jetpacks again, and sure enough, we still couldn't progress. Yeah, we don't know really what was going on or why something wasn't working right, or something wasn't loading in right, or something wasn't revealing itself right. So we were kind of stuck here for a minute and thinking our run was dead, or we would have to at least look around, figure out what was the trigger, then start the level over and try to run it again. It turned out that Dim discovered some random brute that was stuck somewhere. Dim was able to line himself up enough to kill it, and sure enough, the level progressed. Still not too sure why this ended up being the case, and I'm not too sure why we couldn't get the brute to reveal himself when we weren't looking around. It could have just been a really bad coincidence that occurred to us twice, or maybe by us not looking in all directions, some of the enemies may get stuck somewhere? I don't know. Going on to Savo Highway, we immediately ran into another problem, because how are we going to navigate this level without being able to see where we're going, and also likely on foot? Because if you try to drive a warthog, it doesn't end very well. You can pretty much just slam into a rock wall or back up into a rock wall. So we didn't have too many options here. We thought we were just going to have to do a blind walk and try to navigate through this desert on our own, which would have been really tedious. However, Dim had an idea, and we were going to just rely on those trusty Marines. So we ended up naming our Marine John, and he jumped in the driver's seat, and we decided to just let this Marine drive. And 2007 AI is actually pretty hilarious, but hey, at least we managed to get outside. And every time we drove up just a little bit, for whatever reason, John would turn around, start driving backwards, and circle around enemies. And since we can't really look around, we were kind of restricted to how much we could shoot. But since Dim was over in another warthog, he would actually occasionally ride by, and the Marine that was in the back turret would clear the enemies, helping John move up. There was a tragic moment midway through the level where we got stuck and our warthog flipped, and oh no, what happened to John? We would have to walk now without a driver, but somehow John actually came back. He managed through it and survived. So he decided to keep driving us for a little while, which was pretty cool. When we got to the section of level where we have to go off of the jump, John just went ahead and gunned it. We did not expect him to whatsoever, and he managed to make the jump. We have no idea how, and then right after we made it across the jump, John just jumped out of the warthog and leaped off the cliff. Yeah, no idea what that was all about, but nonetheless, he did clear us through a pretty large portion of this level. And for the most part, the rest of this level involved us figuring out how to get up this ladder here, which we used our parkour skills. And then we kind of just walked aimlessly down a highway, fought some brutes occasionally, and sure enough, this level was also beat. But now we're going on to the storm, which introduces a scarab, which will be a whole new threat and something I'm not sure if we have what it takes to take on just yet. But we had bigger issues to deal with, because at the beginning of this level, we couldn't get into the first room. Seriously. The door at the start of this level was one of the biggest challenges we had faced so far. No matter what, we all were just slightly not facing the right direction to press the button to open up the door. We tried dying and respawning. It didn't work. We could not press the button. We would go in the warthog, back in and out, try to get our Spartan to just turn a little bit to press that button, and we had no luck. So finally, after us just trying to figure something out, I started just backing up the warthog as far as it would let me, and eventually I hit a railing or something that ended up giving us the perfect angle to just barely press the button and open the door, finally getting us into the first room of the storm. So we pushed through, just kind of going through a memory, but then, you know, that giant scarab dropped in, which was terrifying. We had a lot of ideas of how we were maybe going to approach this. Luke thought he would jump off the elevator that no one knew existed, land on the scarab, and just easily take it out. It didn't really work for him. I thought maybe I could use a turret and try to hit it with the missile pod. I was having a lot of trouble not only getting in a turret, but also aiming. And Dim got lucky when he was in a ghost, and he ended up getting an angle just enough to barely take the leg out of the scarab. And from there, we were able to jump in the scarab, take out the battery, and we were able to clear this scarab relatively easy. However, don't you worry, by the time we got to the Ark, that scarab was a completely different story, because that was a struggle in itself. Anyways, we pushed through the next part of the level. We killed those hunters. At the final AA gun that we're supposed to take the little glowy energy ball and blow it up, we were having a lot of trouble finding an angle that we're able to do damage to the thing with, but Luke and I actually figured something out. If we just jumped up and down on these rocks, we could shoot our BR or whatever gun Luke was holding at the thing and slowly pick off the damage. It's a little tedious, but nonetheless, we were able to chip away at the health. When we got to Floodgate, it was really interesting because we were all really optimistic this level would be a breeze. We're just gonna cruise on through it, nothing to worry about. We were talking about how easy this level was going. The next thing I know, everybody was dead except for me, but they all were spectating and they gave me some calls occasionally when things were maybe about to kill me, which kept me alive a couple minutes longer to get them to spawn back. But otherwise, after we got to that last outside section and we pushed into the flood ship Covenant thing where we get the message from Cortana, we mostly just had to make sure we didn't walk off the map accidentally, and things were cruising pretty easily. But like I said earlier, going onto the Ark, things were a little bit different than what we had anticipated. Firstly, navigating that first area blind, a little bit difficult depending on which direction you're facing, because you have to kind of go up this weaving type of trail to get to the next area, and it was just a little bit annoying. Vehicles weren't really anything that we felt like we could rely on too much at the beginning part of this level, though we all started to feel a little more comfortable when we did get ghosts at various times, just because ghosts at least let us move at a sideways speed, which is just slightly faster than maybe walking on foot. Pushing up into the area where there's all the AA wraiths and we just have to kind of clear all the enemies, it was a little chaotic because we couldn't really see where we were going and we're getting shot at a lot, but nonetheless we did manage to take out all of the wraiths and all of the enemies slowly but surely, and then the Forward Unto Dawn flew in, kind of throwing our camera angles all off in different directions, meaning we were stuck staring at whatever was directly in front of us for the next few minutes. We did cruise up ahead a little bit more to where we have to go into the next area and take out all of the wraiths. At the end, I had to jump into a wraith and everyone else managed to die, and I really struggled because I couldn't aim the wraith down to kill the shade turret and the enemies right in front of me. I would have to back up all the way back to get an angle that would maybe hit the enemies I wanted rather than, you know, looking directly at what I wanted to shoot. Nonetheless, we navigated through the indoor section, pushed down through the desert, went straight up to that scarab, looked it in the eye, except we couldn't really look at it, looked it in the foot, and we thought we had a good plan here. We were going to work together to make sure we took out the legs and then board it like before and take out this scarab easy peasy. Even the tanks were a lot easier to drive than we had anticipated, so we had that working for us. The one thing we didn't expect was that once we got the scarab on its knees and were able to board it, we realized that we actually were all facing the direction that the battery was not. So we ended up getting stuck in this tiny little scarab room, not being able to face the battery reactor thing to blow it up and progress the level. We tried messing around with grenades. We tried doing everything we could think of to turn ourselves around so we were facing the right way, though we couldn't seem to pull it off. This was awful, and this was one of the examples of a problem we would run into again where we're just all unluckily not facing the correct way, which ends up being a major detriment for a run like this. Eventually, we kind of drove around if we could find a vehicle and did what we could to get our cameras turned in the right direction, and then from there we had to figure out how to down the scarab again so we could board, and fortunately Dim had an angle just enough where he could take out the scarab and we were able to move on to the last part of the level, which was mostly an indoor walkthrough where we did get lost a couple of times because it would teleport us, and when all you can see is a wall 6 inches away from your face, things start to look very alike and it becomes a little harder to differentiate what part of the level you're on. Going on to the Covenant, we decided our best bet is just to walk as much as we could, so we walked and walked and walked all the way till we got inside to the first tower. We kind of dodged some vehicles on the way in, of course, and we decided we were going to try to do some speedrun strategies to save time. Now, jokingly, I said I'm going to do the speedrun jump to go straight to the elevator, and I actually accidentally pulled it off, this weird crouch jump thing. So I was going up the elevator and teleported everyone to me, so getting up to the elevator wasn't that hard. We ran in there, we cleared out the brutes, we activated the first tower, and things were looking pretty well until it turned out we had to find a way to get back down the elevator, and all of our characters were not facing the button to press the elevator. We already had killed all the brutes, so we couldn't use them to do the auto aim trick to turn around. We ended up being stuck in this room for a hilarious amount of time, actually, with how long it took us to come up with a solution to escape from this room. But ultimately what ended up happening is we had to start learning how to manipulate what direction we were facing by dying and respawning over and over again. And the only way we can occasionally manipulate it where a player was was facing a certain direction was based on where each other player was standing in correlation to where the walls were. We don't know a full science as to how it worked, but we just know that we messed around with it enough until eventually I respawned facing the right way. I was able to hit the button and we were able to move out of this elevator. But we definitely knew from now on we would have to be extra careful if we were going into any closed off rooms that we had to open doors with, because it seems like any door we have to press, it can really just make or break a run. So we got back outside and Dim decided it would be easier just to walk back to the beach. However, I was determined that if we were going to beat this Halo run without turning, I would have to start learning how to drive a Warthog now and not later, because we're going to have a Warthog run nonetheless at the end of this run, and we're going to have to learn how to make it through it, right? Well, it didn't go very smoothly. I definitely crashed a lot of times, and Dim was really starting to have doubts that we would ever make it over to him. There was also the part where I ran over Luke and he died, but right after he died, I had a clear path straight back to regroup with my team, and technically I was able to drive that Warthog in. I was pretty proud of it, despite Dim doubting my abilities. So we jumped in the Hornets, which surprisingly were easy enough to navigate. We flew over to the next tower that we had to go into. We wandered around that tower, lost as we normally do when we typically play through Halo 3, The Covenant. But we did finally make our way up to the elevator, and we were extra careful to make sure we had one person on button duty the whole time. Though, it turns out that there's a cutscene that plays and you're facing the right way right afterwards either way. So we're able to clear this next part, head on down. Now between this part and the end of the level, a lot of different things happened. It got pretty chaotic pretty quickly. Firstly, Luke got driven off the edge by a random Marine. Dim and I were trying to figure out how to jump in a Hornet, and then a Marine just took off in our Hornet, so we were stranded. Luke managed to get a Hornet and get on top of a Scarab, and somehow when I went AFK for a minute to get something to drink, I came back. We had managed to take down both Scarabs. Dim mostly credited it to the fact that he made sure to pay attention to which way he was facing when the Scarab went down, and he was able to board that, and maybe Luke got lucky on the other one. So we're feeling pretty good. We went ahead and went into the bridge. We cleared in the next room where we teamed up with the Flood. We skipped over a cutscene. We backtracked out of there and only almost died a couple of times. With 2 levels left, we were feeling confident that maybe this would be a run we would be able to pull off, and we were actually pretty optimistic so far. Cortana, this level was a little bit of a mess, because for the most part, when you're just staring at like the shapes of things, trying to figure out where you are in this world, and you just see kind of a wall of flood or stuff, figuring out where you are is pretty difficult in itself. For the most part though, it was doable to navigate through. There were 2 rooms that gave us the most trouble. This room specifically, because you have to navigate these narrow ridgeways, and then you have to kind of do a jump across to make sure you don't fall all the way back down, which was very tedious. I ended up using deployable covers to make markings so I could tell where I was supposed to go, or when I was maybe getting too close to backing off an edge or something. And then in that final area, after we got Cortana and we're on our way back out, it was a little bit nerve-wracking because of how easy it is just to back off and fall off the map. Luke and I definitely struggled with this part quite a bit, though Dim had his own strategy because he didn't want to have to try to aim to shoot at those generator things. So instead, he just jumped over to each generator and it broke them on his own. From there, we just had to make our epic escape. While we really didn't know at this point where we were going or how things were really going, it honestly seemed like we were working as less of a group and more as individuals at this point. But nonetheless, we did clear this level. We're going on to that final level in Halo 3. So going into this last level, there were a lot of different strategies as to how we could approach this. Luke and I were feeling confident that we had done our grenade jump trick so many times on this level to skip straight to the top firefight area that it would be a walk in the park. So it was a little bit more challenging. We did run into a few issues. I will be honest, at one point I may have fallen off the map, died, respawned on Dim, who already had finished the firefight section at the top, and just said, "Hey, look, we made it." And we kept walking to the next boss fight. But for the most part, Dim did a pretty good job clearing the Flood despite not being able to turn and look around. In the final boss fight, the main strategy that was used, which ended up working out pretty well, was Dim would grab the Spartan laser. He would then do a jump shot where he had to time the Spartan laser overcharge onto Guilty Spark at the right time and jump to make sure the shot actually hit, since we can't actually look up at Guilty Spark. But it did make this boss fight relatively easy. And then pushing on to the Warthog run itself, which, oh boy, was this the ultimate ultimate challenge to try to conclude this thing. Okay, so starting things off, I spent a ton of time with the warthog stuck in the beginning. Matter of fact, I think there was a moment where Dim decided he was going to go walk a little bit and get a feel for the way around, and he asked how much progress we had made, and we were stuck even further back than when we had started, so we ended up switching warthogs, and eventually we did come up with a little bit of a strategy where Dim would punch the warthog, and then I would steer it, and then as soon as I would start to get off course, I would jump out, we would punch the warthog and steer it, and try to line it up the best we could for this first stretch. So we managed to all jump in the warthog together and drive from point A to point B, making it to that first checkpoint A-okay. However, the warthogs are nearly impossible to turn at a relatively normal speed, especially with how quickly this level deteriorates once you start to move up. And while we did try methods of finding a way to turn the warthog and get it through this kind of roundabout area and off of the ramp, it really wasn't going to happen. So instead, we decided to try our luck from what we had learned when we did our warthog on foot run and try to run a little bit more on foot to see if we would have better luck if we could make it to the next warthog. So with still us not turning, we ran across these falling platforms and made it a point to jump onto the left side of the tunnel section, which gave us a little bit of a runway to not have to worry about the level just falling down from underneath us for a bit. And while this part does take a while to jump across and you do have a risk of sliding off and falling to your death, once you make it to the end, you do have a chance to run straight for that next platform area where the warthog is, which we managed to pull off and get a checkpoint there. But from here, this is where it just became way too difficult to even figure out not only how to do it, but even theoretically how we would be able to pull this off. Getting the warthog around all of the turns required to clear this area would be near impossible. And though we spent multiple hours here alone, and I managed to come up with a strategy where I could bounce the warthog off of certain walls, line it up the best I could, and then use the falling gravity of the building to navigate the warthog all the way around without needing to turn, when we finally were able to make it off the jump, we typically would just fall to our death and not even make it onto a platform. We had one instance out of the multiple hours we attempted this where we did land on the platform, but even then we didn't have enough time to go anywhere with it because we needed to turn even more to the left, and then we would have to hope we didn't fall off of any of the falling platforms without having to turn. The amount of RNG required to pull this off would be absolutely enormous. So we did try running it on foot like we did in our no vehicle video. However, we would be stuck without a warthog, which is required for that last jump. And while there is one more warthog ahead, we wouldn't be able to get to that warthog in the route that we used in our no run video. So at the end of the day, this is pretty much as far as you can get in Halo 3 without looking. Honestly, a lot of the times that we decide whether or not we're even going to approach a challenge based off of if we thought it was possible or if we think that it would make for an interesting story to tell. Well, this is one we weren't able to do. We were still really proud of how far we were able to get. But then we had one more idea that we thought was at least worth trying. Whether it worked or not, we decided, what if we loaded it up on legendary difficulty like we were doing maybe Vidmaster Annual, and we jumped in the ghosts. Sure, we can't steer the ghosts, but at least we can move at a decent speed, slightly faster than walking speed at a diagonal angle, and if we're lucky, maybe one of us will be facing the right way at the very end. We could boost on and end the level. And while we did have to use soft checkpoints just to see if this was even possible, if anyone was to figure out how to do this in one run, it would be incredibly difficult, just because getting the ghost to turn in certain corners in such a timed setting can be incredibly difficult to get time after time again. Fortunately, if you can get your ghost to turn and jump out at just the right moment and then jump in, it'll reset your camera so you can go in the same direction that the ghost is facing, which became something somewhat useful. But seriously, just to test whether or not this was even possible was beyond difficult. But we actually pulled it off, and we made that jump at the end. And even though it looked like we weren't going to be able to pull it off, our last ditch effort in putting the difficulty on legendary of all things ended up being worth it, and we're able to complete this run as well without turning, meaning Halo 3 is officially possible to be completed without turning. It really just came down to this last section of the last level being something that would make or break any run. And now we have other Halo games we want to try out next, because whether or not we can beat all of the Halo games might be its own challenge, or if we can even beat another Halo game for that matter. What do you guys think of the video? If you liked it, maybe be sure to subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss anything we upload in the future. Otherwise, we really appreciate you guys supporting us. You can follow us on Twitter at Rocket Elijah for me, or at Rocket Sloth Luke for Luke. Otherwise, that's it for today. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.